Right. Well, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about Pete Seeger, and earlier in the stream I was talking about Woody Guthrie, and we had Bob McLennan on the phone earlier. And if you're not familiar with Pete Seeger, he left behind an incredible body of work, as did Woody Guthrie, and I was lucky enough to see Pete Seeger perform twice before he passed away, and he's been a huge influence on me and my writing and my music, and I got to see him at the Western New York Peace Center dinner at the Convention Center here in Buffalo, and then a week later I went to Beacon, New York to see him perform at the Town Crier. It was the 65th anniversary of the Weavers, and that's the first time I didn't meet him, but I saw our next guest, and I'm going to call him on the phone right now, and his name is David Bernz, and he's a producer. Well, he produced a few of Pete's records, and he also has a band that I saw. They're called The Work of the Weavers, and I met him when the band Folk Faces came through on tour, and we hung with him at his music shop, and let's get him on the phone now.
Hello?
Hello, David. This is Tyler Westcott. How are you?
Hi, Tyler. I'm okay. How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for doing this today. I know I got you kind of last minute, and I appreciate you taking the time and being so generous, and say thanks to Jake, too, for relaying the message.
I did.
All right. Well, I've just been singing some Woody tunes and some Pete tunes. I just got done singing The Banks Are Made of Marble. But
that's a good one.
Yeah, I used to sing that one at Occupy Wall Street. But
written by a fellow named Les Rice, who lived about 15 miles from me, across the river from me.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know who wrote that one. So we randomly met that one time. I was just saying that I saw Pete twice in my life, once at the Convention Center in Buffalo, and the second time was at the 65th anniversary of the Weavers, and you were performing at the Town Crier. Work of the Weavers was playing, and I remember
that night well.
And I was sitting at the bar, and Pete walked in with 2 canes, and I think I put my hand out, very eager to shake his hand, and he said, "Hello," and walked past me, and I was an eager fan, but then we randomly met when my band was in Beacon, and we went to the open mic at the Town Crier, and then you invited us over to the shop to hang out for a little bit, and man, that was special. That really made my tour, made my year. I don't know. It was great to meet you then, and
likewise, it was good to have you over.
I was just reading. I have this book, the Where Have All the Flowers Gone book, and I was reading the part about the song "Kisses Sweeter Than Wine," and then I just read your name in there, and I was like, oh wow, I met that fella.
"Kisses Sweeter Than Wine" is actually a song that's very near and dear to my family for an odd reason.
Yeah, do you mind sharing? I just remember as soon as I came in the shop, I picked a 12-string off the wall and started singing that song, you know?
Well, the thing is this, that when Lee Hayes of the Weavers was a young man, he was working in the sharecroppers movement, writing union songs, but but things got kind of tough for him out in Arkansas, and they said, you ought to go to New York and share these Union songs. And what they did is he had no money, but they found a bunch of friendly houses along the way where he could stay and make his way to New York. And eventually, of course, he did make his way to New York, and he met Pete Seeger, and he formed the Almanac Singers and so forth. But one of these friendly houses was a poet, and his wife and his kids. His name was Walter Lowenfels, and he had 4 kids. And 2 of them were twins, and the other 2 weren't, all girls. And Lee ended up staying there for 6 months. Anyway, later on, move ahead a bunch of years, and the Weavers suddenly, after World War II, the Weavers started having folk hits on the radio, and Decca Records realized there was potentially money in folk music, and they came to Pete and said, Jesus, Senate was a big hit, Goodnight Irene was a big hit, what else you got? And so he digged it into his folder of song ideas, and one of them was Kiss is Sweeter Than Wine. It started out as an Irish lament about a cow of all things, but Leadbelly and Pete had somehow worked it into Kiss is Sweeter Than Wine.
Right.
They had a chorus, but they didn't have verses, so it was just a song idea. So Pete said to Lee, hey, can you work on this? Get me some verses. And so Lee started writing these verses. As you know, we have verses as, oh Lord, I was the father of twins, and my children numbered just about 4. And a lot of people believe that he was thinking of Walter Lowenfeld's family, 4 kids and 2 twins, and he was living there at the time pretty much.
Okay.
And the reason it's near and dear to my family is the 2 twins were Mana and Judy. And Judy is my wife's mother. She's actually in my house right now.
Oh, wow.
And so that song was, one of the family favorites because she's one of the 2 twins mentioned in the song.
Wow, that's so wild. Yeah, I was just reading that he sang it at your wedding, and that's just that's incredible. Wow, thank you for sharing that wonderful story. So you own the music shop in Beacon, Jake's Main Street Music, right? And
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, and check out Jake's Main Street Music on Beacon and on Main Street, and you're a musician and a banjo player and a producer but what was the first time you heard Pete's music and what drew you to it?
Well, it's also a kind of family thing. My father, his name was Harold Bernz. Harold. One of 7 kids, Jewish kids in Brooklyn. No real money. His own father worked in the garment district designing dresses. He got interested in the union movement because of all the tough conditions at the place that he worked, and it was right around the time that he was taking up guitar. So when he heard that there were people forming a union song magazine in New York City, it was eventually called the People's Songs Bulletin. It was the precursor to today's Sing Out magazine. Anyway, he went and volunteered. And you know how it is with organizations. If you're willing to work, they put you to work. So within a few months, he was on the editorial board of the People's Songs Bulletin, and he got to be friendly with all of the people involved, which included Pete Seeger and Fred Hellerman, and he even knew Woody Guthrie, and he met Leadbelly, and so on. So my father knew Pete. So when my father got married and moved out to Croton-on-Hudson, Pete, by that time was living in Beacon, which is not too far, both river towns. And Pete would stop by my house now and then. And so I kind of knew Pete growing up. And as I got old enough to play guitar and start learning folk songs, I got to realize how important he was. And there was always something incredibly magnetic about him. And it came from modesty, really. He was a really well-known guy who was very modest. He never touted his fame, and he never wanted people to lionize him and so forth. And yet, his musicality, his humanity, always shone through. And as he sang up and down the river for Clearwater as I was growing up, I realized that every event he sang at was not really a performance as much as a community gathering. And there was something wonderfully attractive about this, and I decided I wanted to know more, and that I wanted to know Pete more. And so I started volunteering for things. I volunteered for the revival, and he was always so busy at the revival, I decided to volunteer for the day before and the day after, where they had to do setup and cleanup. And so I ended up like driving garbage pails to Beacon with Pete and Toshi and storing them in the shed and so forth. And I just got to know him better over the years. And finally, when I moved to Beacon, not because Pete was here, but because it's where I could afford a house at the time. Beacon was sort of on hard times way back then. But there I was in Beacon, and Pete found out that I had a little home recording set up. He began to call me and say, can you record this, and can you record that? I need to record a song about Andorra and send it to the ambassador from Andorra, and I need to record answers to the questions about the civil rights movement that the BBC is sending. And my brother-in-law at the Smithsonian, he wants something recorded. And we just developed this relationship that was just wonderful.
Wow, that sounds like you got what you wanted and then some.
Way more. He gave me much more than I ever could have asked for.
Wow, that's incredible. That's really incredible. So would you share a favorite memory or a story that just whatever comes to mind just off the top of your head?
Well, the story that you reminded me of when you talked about the Weaver that's 65, it's both amazing and wonderful and happy, but also sad. But I'll share that with you. And then if my time is up, please tell me, because I don't want to take up too much time.
Oh no, this is a highlight, I would say. So no worries.
You mentioned seeing Pete at that concert with canes.
Yeah.
And helping him with his canes. I want to tell you that when I was interviewing Pete one day, one of the things I did was he would come over to record things, but he would inevitably start talking, and I would just leave the mic on, and I ended up with a wonderful set of recordings of Pete's spoken word, which I'm actually transcribing into a book. I don't have a title yet, but hopefully within a year I'll have a book. But anyway, the point of this is that one day he was talking about Woody Guthrie, and this show tonight is about Pete and Woody, so this is, I think, an appropriate story. And he said, yes, Woody taught me a lot about living. He was a little older than me, and he took me across country. He showed me how to sing in saloons. He said, don't be too eager, buy a nickel beer, sip it for a long time, put your banjo on the counter. Sooner or later, someone will come along and say, can you play that thing? And you say, maybe, a little. This is Woody teaching Pete how to coax dollars out of people when you need them. But don't be too eager, and you don't pick it up, and you don't play it. And finally, someone will come up and say, I'll give you a quarter if you play a song. And that's when you swing it out down and play your best song. So he was telling me these stories about him and Woody roaming and what Woody taught him. And at some point in the story, he told me about the first time he ever tried to hop off a freight train and how he broke his banjo. And it turned out, he told me that he bought his very first 5-string banjo in a pawn shop on West 10th Street, and when I asked him what kind it was, he said it was a bottom-of-the-line SS Stewart, plain, nothing fancy at all, made at the turn of the century. And when I asked him what happened to it, he told me the story. The first time he tried hopping off a freight train with Woody Guthrie was outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, and he wasn't an expert, and he landed right on the banjo, snapped the neck in two. And he said that he then swapped a camera he had with him at a pawn shop to they had a guitar there, so he'd have something to play. But I said to Pete, well, what happened to the broken banjo? And he said, well, I mailed it back to a girl I knew in New York at the time, but I never saw her again, or never saw the banjo again. But about 40 years later, she called me up about something, and I mentioned the banjo, and she said, well, yeah, I did receive it, but it's been so long, I don't know where it's gone to. Now, that would normally have ended the story, but I said, well, Pete, I have to tell you something, because about 10 years ago, I'm talking about myself now, I was in a used instrument shop here in New York looking for a 5-string banjo, and the owner had a bottom of the line, turn of the century SS Stewart, and I asked how much it was, and he said it's only $200. And I said, why would you sell me a vintage banjo by a well-known maker for only $200? And he flipped it over and he said, well, look, the neck's been snapped in two and re-glued, and I don't know when it happened or how it happened or who fixed it, and I can't stand behind it or guarantee it in any way, so that's why I'm letting it go for the low price. So I bought it. I said, Pete, I bought this banjo. It's been sitting in my house for over 10 years. And he says, you better bring me that banjo. So I brought it to him, and he turned it over, and his finger traced the snap line where the glue was, the glue line. And he said, oh, my gosh, this is exactly where mine snapped. It's exactly how it snapped. I think you got my banjo here. And I love to believe that somehow his first banjo found its way to him, in Beacon at the end of his life. So at the Weavers at 65, I told that story, and I thought this was going to be a great moment in the show. I would tell the story to the crowd, and then I would invite Pete up to stage and say, let's reunite Pete with his original banjo for a song. And I said that, and the crowd applauded, and I looked over, and somebody, maybe you, or maybe it was Tom Chapin or both of you, was helping Pete to get on the stage with two canes. Mm-hmm. Now, I had never seen Pete, in all of hundreds of times I played with him or worked with him, I had never seen him need a cane or any assistance from anybody to get up on a stage. So in what I thought was going to be a very triumphant moment in the show, it was a moment where I suddenly realized something was wrong with my friend Pete, that things were changing. And it turned out that was November. By December, he couldn't get out of bed. By January, he was having a heart operation, and by the end of January, he passed. So this was really the last time that I got to play with Pete, and I didn't know it at the time.
Wow. Well, I remember that moment vividly. It was a beautiful moment, nonetheless, my friend, and what a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's such a great story. So what do you think we can do? I mean, I feel like the world really misses Pete quite a bit, and we need some more of his love and, humanity. And how do you think that we can continue Pete's dream of peace and a cleaner, better planet, and just be kind to one another? Like, what do you think that we can do nowadays, and how can we keep that dream alive?
Well, Tyler, I am not going to claim that I have the answers or that I have that level of wisdom. The only thing I can do is repeat a few things that Pete said so often that he began to call them his mantras at the end of life. One of them was to support little things. He said that they can stop a big thing. The powers that be that are trying to keep the status quo can stop big things because they're very visible. But how do they stop a million little things? So don't be afraid to do small things or to be part of little organizations or and so forth that are trying to do pieces of good work here and there. Be part of those million little things. And the other thing is about communication, and this is the one that Pete really called his mantra, and I wish I could say it exactly, but paraphrasing Pete, he said that if the human race is going to be here in a couple of hundred years, there's going to have to be a revolution. Not a violent revolution, but what he would call the love revolution, or the willingness to communicate revolution, the willingness to speak with those with whom we disagree, revolution. And that, it may be through things that you have in common. It may be through music or cooking or painting or sports or any of the arts, which he felt were so important. But in today's world, today's country, today's USA, where we are so divided that we have to politicize the pandemic, so divided that we can't trust that a black person arrested in Minnesota will be safe. So divided that Republicans and Democrats can't compromise in Congress to fix the most important things or to fix even this pandemic. and that people, I'm not talking about the politicians, people, my next door neighbors who supported Trump and I are unable to talk to each other reasonably about it without getting excited. This must stop. Pete supported what he called the peace, not a Pollyanna type peace for everybody all the time, everything's wonderful, but what he called the peace of the bargaining table, which means the ability to sit down and have real communication with people whom you disagree with without it becoming hateful or violent or negative. So that's what we have to do, is be willing to communicate. And there's people guilty on both sides. You know, most of my friends are from the liberal or progressive or radical persuasion, and a lot of them can't talk to a Trump person. They only want to be friends with a Trump person. I can't subscribe to that. We all have to learn to talk with each other with respect.
Wow, I 100% agree with that, and that is such a good point and such a beautiful thing to take forth into the world, and I think that's a good place to stop. And I'm so grateful for your articulate, thoughtful answers and being so generous with your time and your incredible stories. I appreciate you so much, and I cannot wait to reconnect with you. I'm going to come down to the Hudson Valley and hang out at the shop soon as we can. And I appreciate your time so much, and thank you.
Please do stop by. We'll put some great guitars, Collings or something in your hands. But also thank you for the work you're doing right now during this pandemic and otherwise, and for bringing the history and the music to people out there. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for talking to me today. See you later.
Bye-bye now.
Bye. That was David Bernz. Those were some incredible stories, and wow, that was really pretty excellent. Well, thank you folks so very much. This is my 5th and final Roots Music Wednesday. I'm gonna be taking a break from doing these for a while. I might do them again, but who knows? And I want to thank you for tuning in, and for all your kind comments and generous donations, and for everything, really. And I hope that we can go out and see some live music soon, and I hope to see you all soon.